Everyone has been talking about Frank Lampard and Steven Gerrard, but once again, we're about to find out if it's been Michael Carrick all along. This week on the Strattycast, we look at United's 1-1 draw at Stamford Bridge, Cristiano Ronaldo being completely deluded, and how the recent fallout over his future could work out in Manchester United's favour. Michael Carrick is back where some would say it all started. Middlesbrough was the first professional club the former midfielder played for as a 9-year-old boy. That's why he's described his return to Boro as special. He's been confirmed as the new Middlesbrough manager, and I think he had a brief spell as caretaker boss at United. 3 games which were unbeaten in a pretty horrific season for the club. But I think everyone kind of wish him well. Most people that I've speaking to around the club in the past few years about Michael Carrick and the way he's carried his roles as an employee after retiring is that he's very focused on the job at hand, very calm and assertive. And I think we'll probably see that kind of presence from him on the touchline. He's not going to be someone that's going to be rolling his sleeves up and roaring at players and shouting. I think he's going to be kind of calm and collective. But I'm interested to see how another one of our former players gets on in the whole managerial world. We've seen the likes of Gary Neville step into it. That was a disaster for him. He won't be returning to management. Paul Scholes had a similar spell down the leagues too and didn't quite work out for him. But then you look at Wayne Rooney, who didn't work out for him at Derby, but he could still hold his head up high and say he did a good job because the club was in absolute ruins. And then he went kind of broadened his horizon a bit. Some people might say it was a step back to go to the MLS and become manager at DC United. But look, he's a young coach. It's probably a good idea for him to go out and broaden his horizon a bit as a coach and learn different cultures and learn how to deal with different standards of player and a different kind of the different tasks that come with that. Every league has its different tasks, that shows different tasks and is different in its own way. And if Rooney can go to America, come back and as a more experienced coach and take with him what he did at Derby, he could work out to be a good all-rounded coach, and it'd be interesting to see how it works out for Carrick at Boro. As I said, he had 3 games as caretaker manager at United. They ended up in 2 wins and 1 draw. So they were unbeaten over the 3 games, and that included a 3-2 win over Arsenal. So the kind of questions that the people might have about Carrick joining Middlesbrough is, will he bring Mike Phelan with him? I think that's a possibility because most coaches, they stick with the people they know, and that's the kind of environment that they want to build is people that they can trust. And you won't find too many coaches that go into a job and select a bunch of people they don't know. So I would be surprised if Mike Phelan didn't follow Carrick to Boro. And then the other kind of question, which I think Boro fans would have more so, is what sort of manager are we expecting Carrick to be? And I think from a character perspective, I think you'll see someone that's calm and collective as a manager, and someone also which he would have learned at United under his time with Solskjaer and Mourinho, that there was different phases in which the media comes circulating tough questions, and he's learned how managers deal with that, and I think that's very important in the modern game. In the Championship, if they don't hit the ground running, the questions will start flooding at Carrick because he's automatically a big story now. He's a decorated Manchester United midfielder and an England international who didn't get as many appearances for England as he would have deserved, but one nonetheless. But moving on to some of the bigger talking points from the weekend, we're a few days on now from the 1-1 draw against Chelsea at Stamford Bridge. And the first one that I wanted to get onto is Varane, because his injury is a huge blow to Erik ten Hag. And look, it's only for, I think we have 7 or 8 games before the World Cup. We've 3 games in the league between now and the World Cup, and to be without Varane for those 3 games is a big kick in the teeth because he's been a formidable part of our defence since the beginning of the season. Well, since Ten Hag is kind of set on his best back 4, which is 2 centre backs of Lisandro Martinez and Raphael Varane. Now the recent hamstring injury which occurred against Chelsea will rule him out of action for United until after the World Cup. I think he's touch and go for the first game of the World Cup for France, but he's expected to be selected for the Deschamps squad. And we just been watching the World Cup with our fingers crossed, hoping that Varane doesn't pick up a serious injury right away, because his track record is not good. There's going to be a lot of football condensed into a month. There's not enough football as it is. And you're asking players to go that extra level over a short period of time, which the World Cup takes place. It's mindless that it's taking place during the season, and I think it really goes against player welfare when you consider the fixture congestion in the Premier League and what's being asked of players. I think, off the top of my head, I know Diego Jota from Liverpool has been indefinitely ruled out of the World Cup. I think the likes of Kyle Walker and Reece James are two England players that are kind of touch and go and are serious doubts for the World Cup as a result of these fixtures. So big players could miss out on the World Cup, and there's still a few games to go and a few weeks to come. And I don't think the managers in the Premier League, or any domestic league for that matter, are going to take lightly on the fact that there's a World Cup around the corner, because as we've seen, managers are getting sacked left, right, and centre. Steven Gerrard, the latest to go in the Premier League, which we're all laughing about, but it's a results business, and managers have to get results, and then you got players trying in the middle being asked to play more minutes. And yeah, there's a few things they've brought in to fix that this season with the 5 substitution rule, which I think is, yeah, it helps, but with the amount of games that they're being asked to play in such quick succession, I don't think it makes all that of a difference. But Varane, look, definitely falling victim to that. I think his reaction as well to getting the injury against Chelsea was quite telling, because he dropped to the floor, seemed to suddenly think that his chances of playing at the World Cup were completely wiped out because he felt the tears. And that was telling that we've got a lot of top level players, such as Varane, doesn't get much better than that, but they're thinking about the World Cup now. And there's still a good few games to go until the World Cup. And that's just a little worry. A little worry that he jumped to that conclusion that his World Cup dreams of trying to defend the title with France had just come closing down on him. In the back of, I think, most people's minds, from a Manchester United perspective at Stamford Bridge, it was about him staying fit, the upcoming games between now and the World Cup, and making sure we can get as many points as we can on the board. Because looking at the 3 games we have coming up in the league, they're all winnable. That's 9 points we should be banking from those, and I think we will definitely be in the top 4 come the World Cup if we can manage to pull off 3 wins from 3 in the league between now and that World Cup. Something else from the game, I think I'm not, it's not rocket science, but Casemiro is the real deal. Really is the real deal. There's no doubting that he's a top class player. I think since he's come into the team and finally shaking Scott McTominay out of the fold, that we've seen top class consistency. He hardly puts a move wrong. But I guess, look, you don't play for Real Madrid without being the finished article. The question is, over time, can he impose these talents on Manchester United as a whole, as the team? Because look, you look at games against Chelsea and other top teams in the league. We're there against Chelsea. I thought there was stages where we completely dominated. And that a year ago was not happening. It's not happening. So I think now that we're starting to get a hold on the team, I think Casemiro's influence is massive to that we have a top class defensive midfielder. Because something we've touched on in previous podcasts, I know Sean alluded to it as well, was the influence, or how fullbacks are integral to Ten Hag's football. But I think now we're starting to see how Casemiro is now in line in terms of being integral with the fullbacks in Ten Hag's system right now. In this United team, I think he's absolutely fundamental to what we're seeing every week. We're finally seeing the top class defensive midfielder United, and we've been crying out for one for years. I think the question too that I think is unfairly tagged on Casemiro and other players when they come to United is, are they just coming for the money? Because Casemiro, you could say, won it all at Real Madrid. Where is his hunger? Where would his desire be to go to United and have to put in the extra yard to achieve that? Well, I think he's pulling up trees at the moment. He's certainly not shown as a player that has just come for a payday, and that's encouraging, because there's been transfers in the past 10 years, I think some of the older ones, where people have questioned Few exceptions too, of course. Zlatan Ibrahimovic was absolutely fantastic, but the thing about Casemiro we need to be careful with is he's not quite that old. He's not quite on the. He's like early 30s. Just I would be hoping the past few weeks that consistent level of performance that we've seen. I want him doing that for the next 2 years, and if he does that for the next 2 years, I'd be quite happy. I think United will be in a good position too because the team is getting better. The players over that duration time should be better. Ten Hag's identity of what he wants from his team should really be in place. So I think Casemiro, look, another one of the new signings I wanted to focus on this podcast after the Chelsea game. Of course, he got that equalising goal at the end. How he managed from that angle and that position, the technique with his head kind of being in a further back position to loop the ball over Kepa was just sensational, really. And look, again, I don't think I need to kind of prove, or I think what he's done in the game speaks for itself, that he's one of the best midfielders in the world and still is. He doesn't just need Toni Kroos and Luka Modric in a midfield trio with him to prove that. He's doing it at Manchester United in the midfield that has just been subject to so much criticism for quite some time. Another thing from the game that he can take is Potter accepted that Chelsea didn't deserve to win. I think I'm noticing quite a bit from our games in recent weeks when we've been battering teams like the Newcastle, which Jamie Carragher forgot about during his coverage the other night when he said that he thought Newcastle could have beaten United. But anyway, even Eddie Howe admitted after the game that United were far better and Newcastle were lucky on the day. But Potter accepted that Chelsea didn't deserve to win. There was a big spell, like I said, in the game, the first 30-35 minutes, that United absolutely bossed the game from midfield. It wasn't until the substitution of Kovacic came on that Chelsea kind of were able to kind of grab the game with a scruff of the neck a little bit. But they didn't create loads of chances. Didn't worry United. But I think just the biggest kind of talking points that we really need to get a centre forward and that suits Ten Hag's style of play. I know you get Martial, I think suits, but he's just not fit enough. And I think it's the problem with relying on someone like Martial, which I just on the Varane injury, it's quite similar because Varane's a player that his significance to the team, there's no disputing it. But it's to be so reliant on a player with such an track record for injuries is a real concern, and it's why I've done a few articles in recent weeks in the blog stressing that I think United really need to go out and sign a centre back in the summer, and not necessarily to replace Varane, but maybe to lift some of the responsibility, because one, I don't think he's able to take the responsibility, and there's nothing on Varane as the player or as a character or anything like that. It's about it just solely his injuries. He's just not reliable enough. Come to that conclusion, I think the longer that we persist with it in the long term, it'll just end up in constant frustration and heartache. And that World Cup coming up, the fact that he's going to be fit just in time for that, he's going to be thrown into the deep end. I wouldn't be surprised that come the end of the World Cup, we're talking about Varane being on the injury list and out for some time because he's just not able to hack it anymore at this level. And look, maybe that's harsh, anymore at this level, because what players, we're getting back into the conversation about what players are being asked to do, especially this season, and the amount of fixtures, quick succession, and especially with a player with a track record for injuries. It's a disaster. So yeah, I haven't got high hopes for the likes of Varane going to the World Cup. I think if he was injured that little bit longer to rule him out of the World Cup, that could even benefit him long term. But he showed that his priorities the other day are solely set on that World Cup and going to Qatar next month. Final topic I wanted to touch on again is Cristiano Ronaldo and how he's just completely deluded. And I'm sick and tired of the back and forths that we're seeing on some radio shows, some coverage over the weekend, particularly between Roy Keane and Gary Neville. I just see a kind of group of players, which I want to exclude Gary Neville from this because he doesn't fall into it, but a group of former players who are clearly still in contact with Ronaldo, consider themselves friends with Ronaldo, but they cannot criticise him, and they'll find ways in which to defend his behaviour And it must be down to lack of fuck your lack of communication for starters, Rio. That's horseshit. Problem there is that Ronaldo's facing up to reality, and like any other player in the squad, has to deal with some calls every now and again. Has to deal with the notion of being dropped for a game, sitting on a bench, and maybe not coming on. That's part of football. And this whole thing that he's a different mindset. Yeah, let him have his mindset. Let him have his mindset at Sporting Lisbon or wherever he so wishes to go in the near future. Because the thing about Ronaldo is he's completely deluded. Because since the summer, his agent came out and made it very clear that his desire was to leave Manchester United. For starters, no problem with that. When that was made public, they've all sat around a table and said, "Fine, we respect your wish. Off you go." Right? No problem. And that may have happened had there been interest in Cristiano Ronaldo. This is where him being deluded comes into it, because Ronaldo was well aware over the summer that there was not interest in his signature. They went bold at the start and suggested that he wanted to be in a team fighting for the Champions League. Then they were showing up a little bit. That team didn't come knocking. The only team that came knocking came from the Middle East. They weren't interested in taking that money, and Ronaldo stayed at Manchester United. Now he has kicked up another fuss. His desire to leave remains. Whether his fussy streak about picking a team in the Champions League remains, he'd have to drop that. He's going to have to accept that he's not a player of that standard anymore, that he's past it. So what are the options? This is why I think Ronaldo's deluded. What are the options for Ronaldo? You ask anyone where he'll go in January, nobody knows, because the interest isn't there. There's some pop-up articles every now and again about Napoli, about Chelsea, but these are only kind of just popping up as clickbait. There's nothing serious about it. There's no serious discussions being had. Like, I spoke to someone at United just early last week, and asking about Ronaldo, and there was no word of any interest from any club. So I think it's going to be an interest in January. I wouldn't be surprised too if his contract was terminated at some stage, because if we're sitting around for the month of January just looking for a club for Ronaldo, that just becomes an issue for United. Why not just terminate the contract and let Jorge Mendes deal with him? If he's going to cause such a noise in the background about his reduced role in the team, which I think is ultimately deserved. And just back to the notion that Ferdinand suggested that there was a lack of communication from Ten Hag. I think what Ferdinand is getting confused with is that some players in some dressing rooms, they get more respect. I think Ferguson would have given the likes of Ronaldo, the likes of Cantona, a bit more leeway in the dressing room, and you understand that. But also, let's not forget that when Roy Keane was kicking on as a player, and Ferguson was then considering getting him out of the team, how quick Ferguson was to remove that leeway he had with players and with leaders in the dressing room, and how quick he was to jump on Keane over something small like an interview with MUTV in a bid to get him out of the club. So there comes a time when these players lose their influence, or maybe not lose their influence, but lose the power that they had in the dressing room. Because I don't think Ten Hag should be bending over for a 37-year-old Cristiano Ronaldo, who, when he plays, doesn't offer as much to the team anymore. So I'm really fed up and sick of all this Ronaldo conversation. So I hope this part of the podcast, that it's the final time we touch on him for a while until he leaves the club. Whether he play against Sheriff during the week, I don't care. It's just it's a matter of time now before he leaves, and I just hope that between Ronaldo, Mendes, Manchester United and Ten Hag, that they can all come to a conclusion without there being much noise in the background. There doesn't need to be as much drama, because that only gives reason for a distraction for players when it comes to playing matches and not getting results. And I think right now I can see harmony within the dressing room, and that's even with Ronaldo being there trying to kind of spoil the stew. But yes, it's time to move on. Time to move on and time to put the team first, which I think Ten Hag has done from day one when it comes to Ronaldo. I can't fault him on that at all. So that's it for this week's episode. Thanks for listening.